You know that feeling. You're sitting in a concert hall, it's completely silent, and you're just waiting for the conductor to lift their baton. It feels like this timeless, almost sacred ritual, right? Well, what if I told you that this whole experience, the silent audience, the famous composer, even the idea of buying a ticket, is actually a pretty modern invention? Let's get into how it all started.
I mean, we just take it for granted today. You buy a ticket, you find your seat, you silence your phone, you sit quietly. But where did all these rules even come from? How did we get from music being this private thing for kings and nobles to a big public show for, well, everyone?
Believe it or not, the concert hall back in the 18th century was a loud, messy, and totally revolutionary place. It was a commercial battleground that completely flipped what it meant to be a composer and what it meant to be a listener. And the whole story really hinges on one very famous composer's journey from a palace servant to a public superstar.
Okay, so before public concerts were even a thing, high art music lived in totally different kinds of places. To really understand the revolution that happened, we first have to get a picture of the old world, a world of private music, created for the pleasure of the super rich.
So in the late 18th century, music mostly happened in a few specific spots. For the longest time, the most important one was the aristocratic salon. We're talking about music performed inside a palace for a private, hand-picked audience of nobles. It wasn't just background music, it was a status symbol, a way to show off your wealth and culture.
And this really gets to the composer's place in all of this, which is perfectly summed up by the story of Franz Joseph Haydn. You know, we're talking about one of the absolute greatest composers of his time, and yet for 30 years at the Esterházy court, he was, in his own words, a servant. He literally wore a uniform, he followed orders, and his music belonged to his boss, the prince. He was a master craftsman, for sure, but a craftsman nonetheless.
But while Haydn was busy serving his prince, this brand new idea was starting to bubble up in Europe's biggest cities. What if music could be a business? What if you could just sell it directly to the public? No aristocrat needed. I mean, this was a wild thought, and it was about to change absolutely everything.
And it all kind of started with a clever loophole. See, in Paris, the Catholic Church banned opera during Lent. It was just considered too fun and frivolous. So, in 1725, this entrepreneur came up with the concert spirituel, the spiritual concert. It gave the public something entertaining to do that was still respectable. And just like that, the public concert as a business was born.
So what was the business model that made this work? It was the subscription concert. Basically, an organizer, an impresario, would sell tickets for a whole season of shows up front. That gave him the cash to hire the orchestra and rent the hall. It was this high-stakes game of supply and demand, and it turned composers into entrepreneurs.
And this idea didn't just catch on, it exploded. By the late 18th century, London was the music capital of the world. Get this, in the single year of 1792, there were 16 different subscription series all competing for the public's money. It was a total frenzy.
Okay, so this is where our story comes full circle. Our composer's servant, Haydn, is about to be tossed headfirst into this crazy, cutthroat new world. A completely unexpected event would take him from the quiet, predictable halls of a Hungarian palace to the loud, chaotic center of this musical marketplace.
So in 1790, Haydn's patron dies, and the new guy who takes over, well, he wasn't really a music fan. So he basically sets Haydn free. Hearing the news, a super-savvy London promoter named Johann Peter Solomon races to Vienna and makes Haydn an offer he just can't refuse. Come to London, the biggest music city on earth, and get rich.
I mean, can you imagine the culture shock for Haydn? He shows up in a city where concerts are advertised in the gossip columns, where rival producers are literally fighting over performers, and where his audience isn't just nobles anymore. It's this new paying middle class and even royals like the Prince of Wales. This wasn't a private salon. This was show business. So this new scene didn't just change Haydn's bank account. It fundamentally changed his music. For the very first time, he wasn't writing for one prince. He was writing for a huge, diverse, and very demanding public audience. He had to learn how to please the crowd.
And you can literally see this change in the notes he wrote. Okay, look on the left. That's a piece from before London. The melody is really complex, a lot of twists and turns. Now look at the right. That's a quartet he wrote for London. See how much simpler and clearer that theme is? It's more direct, almost like a hymn. He was changing his style to grab a much bigger audience right away.
He was actually smack in the middle of a very public debate. English critics were complaining that his instrumental music was just too complicated. They wanted simple, catchy tunes they could hum. But Haydn didn't just dumb it down. Instead, he came up with this brilliant new style that balanced those catchy, folk-like melodies with really shocking and dramatic moments to keep his new audience on the edge of their seats.
And my favorite example of his genius? Well, these public concerts were loud, social events. People would be chatting, mingling, so how do you get them to shut up and actually listen? Haydn invented something called the noise killer, a set-in, super loud blast from the entire orchestra right at the start of a quiet section. It was a musical jump scare designed to grab the attention of a distracted room.
So through all these innovations forced on him by the commercial pressures of the London stage, Haydn wasn't just writing new symphonies. He was actually forging a brand new identity for the composer, one that would define the next 200 years of music.
And the financial payoff was just mind-blowing. At a single benefit concert in May of 1792, Haydn personally took home £350. That was probably more than he had earned in several years as a liveried servant. The market had spoken. A great composer was no longer a servant, but a star who could command a real fortune.
So let's just recap how massive this shift was. Music went from the quiet, intimate salon to the big, noisy public theater. The composer went from being a servant to a celebrity entrepreneur. And the whole financial model flipped from private patrons to public ticket sales. This was a top-to-bottom reinvention of musical life. So you can really see Haydn's journey in 3 acts. He starts as a servant. Then in London, he's forced to become an entrepreneur. And in doing that, he becomes a celebrity, basically creating the blueprint for the modern independent artist, a path that a young guy named Ludwig van Beethoven was watching very, very closely. The next time you're sitting in a perfectly quiet concert hall, just remember its wild, revolutionary roots. A noisy commercial experiment that turns servants into stars. And it really makes you wonder, as we see live music today moving into pubs and car parks and all over the internet, what's the next revolution? What's the concert experience going to look like 100 years from now?